Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are back. We are continuing the sophomore scrutiny series. I've got another fantastic guest. I'm joined by David Gautieri. He is the creator of Guru Fantasy World. David, how are you doing on this fine evening?
I'm doing excellent. It's as you may know, it's July 4th weekend over here in America. We're celebrating our decades or centuries long divorce from you guys over there over the pond. And I've been celebrating like any American would, drinking Mexican beer, having a few Coronas alive. So thanks for having me on in my current state. I appreciate it. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
No, thank you very much for coming on. It feels very fitting that, as you said, 4th of July, you're gonna spend it talking to a Brit about fantasy football. Why not? So those of you who watched the last video, we are continuing our sophomore scrutiny series. We're going to be diving into the running backs today. Really interesting running back class. It sort of felt slightly two-tiered, I think, in terms of there was the two elite guys and then pretty much everybody else. As an overall trend, overall thoughts, David, did you think it was a particularly good class? Are you happy with how they produced last year, or always wanting more?
From the running backs in general, I would say we had the stud in Breece Hall. I think the running backs, I would say, was an underwhelming class across the board, just because there was no quarterback strength. Like anytime there's a running back 101, if it's not like a Bijan level prospect, it's probably more just highlighting like a weakness in the class. But I think the running backs, for the most part, held up their end of the bargain, getting especially a guy like Dameon Pierce in like the second round, who was kind of almost free towards the end of the second round, and he ended up being a contributor. So I think it was a good running back class.
Yeah, it felt like there was a lot of options that produced in fits and spurts and kind of, had the odd week of spike weeks. But you mentioned the big stud there, Breece Hall, obviously flashed incredibly when he kind of burst onto the scene. Really interesting usage in the passing game, I think, which surprised a lot of people. You can see on the screen there 29% targets per route run, which is, that's like elite wide receiver level volume. Currently being valued as the RB4 in DLF ADP, but is coming back off that ACL injury. What do you make of Breece Hall, I guess, as a dynasty asset?
For me, it's tricky because I was in the group that was buying Saquon Barkley when he was last year discounted off the ACL. It was his second year back from it, and he obviously had the ankle injury as well in his first year back. And I was buying that discount. The problem for me a little bit is where it doesn't feel like there is any discount on Breece Hall to buy, right? He's RB4 and DLF ADP. I like to use bulletproof.com ADP, and this is just scraped together by a Dyko, and he's pulling this from Sleeper Leagues. DLF is using a Mox, I believe. So I like to use Bulletproof. I think it's really good data. Breece Hall is RB3 behind only Bijan and Christian McCaffrey in their ADP. So there really is no discount. And we talked about him. Obviously, the ceiling is RB1 overall with that level of receiving work. I mean, in 5 games, he put up like 30 targets, and he barely played in the last game. He was double-digit points every week just because of that receiving role. So the floor is incredibly high, but I do worry a little bit. I mean, sure, everybody likes to point to Adrian Peterson, right? He could be first year back, just automatic, top 5 running back. But then we look at the way J.K. Dobbins, kind of had some complications coming back. And I hesitate buying in at the current price. Like, I look at an alternative like Jonathan Taylor, who has shown that ceiling as well. He is healthy. He had injuries as well last year, but it was an ankle injury. It wasn't as serious as an ACL. And I think he's in for a big year, Jonathan Taylor. I think there's going to be an early season window where you're going to be able to sell Jonathan Taylor for Breece Hall plus. And it doesn't come with, these added compounded risks of, all right, what if there is a setback in the ACL? And what does that do to not just the production, but the market value? So I would like to pivot to Jonathan Taylor, even if I could get +3, plus a 2-3 swap. I would prefer him straight up. So I think you could also pivot to a Christian McCaffrey, who you could sell that age gap. If I can put Christian McCaffrey in a future 2 and maybe a piece of junk like, I don't know, Gabe Davis, get McCaffrey a 1 for Breece Hall, a 2 and a piece of junk like Gabe Davis. That's what I would like to do. I would like to get a feature 1-2 swap by going from Hall to McCaffrey, even if I have to add like some sort of junk throw in. So I do think he's a little bit more of a sell than a buy for me right now. When that price probably drops early in the season, I think that would be more of an opportunity to buy into him and maybe sell some of these other running backs who are performing early in the year for a Breece Hall plus. I don't love the price tag right now.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm a big Breece Hall believer. He's my Dynasty RB2 at the moment, but I think a lot of that is there's no real good Dynasty options at the running back position. You know, part of that, yes, Bijan Robinson is an elite prospect, but part of the fact that there's no great other options is the reason why he's the Dynasty RB1. Let's be honest. I think that there's a lack of those elite talents, elite prospects that are in the good age profile. Jonathan Taylor is probably the only one, and even he has had a down year and injuries the last couple, and doesn't feel particularly, satisfying. I think with Breece Hall, it's really a case of you need to be patient. I think if you have got Breece Hall or you're looking to buy Breece Hall, expecting him to be, a top 12 fantasy asset for the first half of the season, I hate to tell you this, you're going to be massively disappointed, because I think there's a chance he doesn't start the year. If he does start the year, he's going to be eased in. There is no way that the Jets are going to give him that full workload and say, right, here's our workhorse from week one. The Jets have, for the first time in forever, got postseason ambitions this year. They need Breece Hall fully functioning and fully healthy for that playoff run. And I think that you can, I always preach about teams tell you what they think about players. Well, the Jets were rumored to be wanting to take Jamar Gibbs in the first round. The Jets took Israel Abanikanda in the fifth. They're still rumored to be sniffing around Dalvin Cook. I think, to me, as much as Breece Hall keeps releasing videos of him working out, that says that they think Breece Hall's not going to be fully fit and fully functioning for at least the start of the year, if not a little bit beyond. So I love Breece Hall. I love the talent. I love the production last year. And I think he is going to be an elite fantasy producer. But you need to wait for back end of this season, 2024, before you're getting that. And if you're, I'd imagine you're 100% right. We're going to see a price dip in September, maybe into October, when he's not producing those elite fantasy numbers and people are going, oh, well, Breece Hall's not the player I thought he was. And that should perhaps your time to pounce. But if you're a Breece Hall owner, I think you have to hold him, because I don't think you're going to get that elite level of return that he could potentially warrant come kind of December, January, when hopefully, as a Jets fan, he's carrying the Jets into the playoffs. So
I agree.
Do you think that there's any concern for Hall kind of potentially seeing a split backfield with all of these rumors around, Dalvin Cook, Abanikanda? Do you think that could potentially hinder him, or do you think it's a case of when he's healthy, he's going to be a full 3-down workload?
Yeah, I think that question was answered last year when Michael Carter was sent to the shadow realm. I mean, this is Breece Hall's gig when he's healthy. When it's a fully healthy Breece Hall, he's a 3-down workhorse running back who's going to see a lot of rushing work and a lot of receiving work. Yeah. It's just when and if is he going to be fully healthy? That's the question.
So here's a hypothetical for you, and you don't have to answer it perhaps, because it's a bit of an if. If Breece Hall hadn't got injured and he'd continued on as he had done in the first 6 games, would you have him, or rather have him or Bijan?
We would be debating it. We would absolutely be debating it.
So that's where he could get to if he comes back fully healthy. That's where he would be,
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. So the other high-priced running back has taken somewhat of a knock in recent days, weeks, months since the draft. Kenneth Walker, it feels like you're either a believer or a hater, and there's no in-between ground. So where do you fall, David?
It's funny you say that, because I kind of feel that way too, but I've also found myself on both sides recently. So I look at Kenneth Walker, and he's a good player, a young running back, highly drafted, productive as a rookie. But I look at the alternatives when I look at like where he's priced versus Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson is a more efficient rusher last year. 5 yards per carry, 2.1 after contact, versus 4.6 and 1.9 for Walker. Much better receiver. He had 69 receptions on 88 targets, 27 on 35 targets for Walker. And his team didn't just draft another running back in the second round. So really, it's just that age gap, which is holding Walker's value just slightly above Ramondre's right now. I'm looking at BPP. This is just bulletproofff.com if you want to look at this ADP if you're a listener. And Kenneth Walker in the last month being drafted at 410 in startups, Ramondre at 501. So you might even be able to sneak in like a small plus there. I would take Ramondre straight up. On the other hand, I think this is still a guy who's going to be a high volume rusher. Like Seattle wants to run the ball, and Kenneth Walker is probably going to be the leader of that. He's still going to probably see 225, maybe 250 plus carries, maybe double digit rushing touchdowns. It's going to be a high scoring offense. He has the talent. He's certainly an efficient rusher from a yards per carry standpoint, 4.6 yards per carry, and that was on high volume. He was ripping off chunk plays, so he showed an explosive ability. So recently I just sold Jalen Hurts for Justin Fields and Kenneth Walker. And this was a league where I was like a competing team. Don't have my 2024 first because I sold it to acquire Joe Burrow in a trade. And I had like no running backs, but it's a 2 tight end league. I have a pretty strong roster. I have Pitts and Waller. I have some good wideouts. Like I have Ayuk, Burks, Calvin Ridley, Hollywood. I think like one other guy I'm forgetting. But I had no running backs. So I sold Hurts for Fields and Walker. I'm like, all right, at that point, I'm still getting a guy who's going to be, at least he's going to have some spike weeks when he scores those touchdowns. He's going to be a high volume rusher. So I do think he could be in that zone where maybe you buy him if the panic's too high, but you're probably selling him for like these other running backs below, for Ramondre plus, for Tony Pollard plus. Again, if I could sell Kenneth Walker, 2 and some junk for Tony Pollard in a 1, I'm taking Pollard in the 1 and I'm running. I'm just running away with it. So I do think he's more of a sell than a buy, but I can understand trying to acquire him in some situations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really interesting hearing you list some of the guys that you're looking to go and acquire with him, because I thought that I was low on Kenneth Walker. Turns out I've got him at RB13, which, as you can see on the screen, that's where DLF have got him in terms of ADP. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm consensus. But the 2 guys you've listed, I mean, I've got Ramondre Stevenson at 6. I've got Tony Pollard at 8. Like, I would happily take those guys over Kenneth Walker straight up. If I can get
both
something
priced
on top,
behind.
Yeah, if I can get something on top of that, then that's an absolute smash for me. I think for Kenneth Walker, it really relies on what you want from a running back. And I think that Seattle, again, back to team show you what they want. Zach Charbonnet is a solid, safe, productive back. He is not a home run hitter, but he is the kind of guy that is going to get you 5 yards on 1st and 10 when you only really need 4. He will get you exactly what you want time and time again. He's not going to get you that home run. Kenneth Walker will get you 1 yard, 50 yards. And you can see on the screen, 5th in big runs. He had 15 big runs last year. And I think that's what Seattle got fed up of him. You know, you look at Football Outsiders, he was 42nd in success rate last year. The only player that had 100 rushes that was worse than him was James Robinson. And he's, been passed around. The sat not playing for the Jets last year, has just been released by the Patriots. Like, that shows you how bad that success rate is. And I think that I can't buy into Kenneth Walker as a reliable fantasy option, because I'm concerned he's not going to get the receiving volume, because I think Zach Charbonnet is a better receiving back. And you've seen, Pete Carroll and the Seattle, backroom and front office staff talk that receiving ability up. I'm concerned that he's not going to get the volume, because when it comes to, 1st and 2nd down and just wanting to move the chains, are they going to go for the reliable option in Charbonnet rather than Kenneth Walker? And it's like, so at best, Kenneth Walker is probably going to be in a timeshare for the rushing work. not going to see a huge amount of receiving work. And we think this offense is going to be much more pass heavy, having added JSN, got 3 elite receivers. So what is Kenneth Walker? So for me, the price that you're having to pay to acquire him, where he's being valued currently, I think he's an absolute sell. I would easily take any 24 first for him. I love the idea of going and getting Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, all those guys. If you're in win now mode and, are just looking at 2023, sorry, I would quite happily go and target James Conner and a first. I would happily go and target Joe Mixon and a first. Maybe you need to add like a second or third on top of that to go and get those guys. But I'm seriously concerned that Kenneth Walker is a depreciating asset. And that's for a guy that is a sophomore. Like, it seems mad to say this guy's in his second year and he's already on the decline. But I just don't see a world where he comes out, smashes his current valuation and is an ascending asset.
Yeah. And I want to go through a quick exercise real quick before I move on from Kenneth Walker. Because you said the word preferred. They could prefer Charbonnet in these situations where they just want the consistent yardage. And that is a legitimate possibility that they end up preferring Charbonnet over Kenneth Walker. Like, there is an actual possibility he loses the starting job. And if we go through the highest priced running backs in Dynasty, and if they actually have a legitimate backup who could threaten their starting job, let's do it. Bijan Robinson, RB1, absolutely not. Christian McCaffrey, absolutely not. Breece Hall, no. JT, no. Jahmyr Gibbs, no. We know he's going to be the receiving guy. Nobody's taking that. Saquon Barkley, no, absolutely not. Austin Eckler, no. Travis Etienne, you can make a small argument there.
I think even if Tank Bigsby ate into his work, Etienne's still getting the high value touches, which is what we're concerned about with Walker.
And then again, let's go through Josh Jacobs. Absolutely not. Walker, Najee Harris, maybe because he's not very good. Ramondre, no. Nick Chubb, no. Tony Pollard, no. Javonte injured. Derrick Henry, no. J.K. Dobbins, no. Even though he's got injuries. Dameon Pierce, no, not really. Then we get to Swift and Mouse, and it's basically just Walker's like the only one with that cloud hanging over his head, and he's still priced very highly.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there with comparing him to Najee Harris, and it feels like the whole fantasy community hates on Najee Harris, and Kenneth Walker just gets this free ride as this guy that had an abysmal success rate, was sustained on a few breakaway touchdowns last year, and it's like, oh, but he's really good, and it's like, well, I'm not sure he is. Yet Kenneth Walker seems to get a free ride, whilst Najee Harris is basically the bane of everybody and getting ripped to shreds in every article and podcast that I listen to.
Well, if Najee would just average more than 4 yards per carry like once in his career for like a couple of games stretch, that would do him some favors. But we'll see that. Let's see if that ever happens first.
Absolutely. Well, before we move on to the next guy, if you're here, if you're watching, if you've not hit that thumbs up button, help us out. Hit it right now. If you're not subscribed, you are missing out on some incredible content. Tom is absolutely killing it with Best Ball shows at the moment. We have got some really exciting shows coming up. There's more in the sophomore scrutiny series, and I've got some really interesting strategy shows coming over the next couple of months. So hit that subscribe button so you're not missing out on any content coming. The next guy we're going to talk about, James Cook. It feels like people are perhaps sleeping on the potential that is there. We've got, he's not a true 3-down workhorse. He's a guy that we saw fumble his first touch in the NFL, but they've not really brought in anyone considerable to complement him. I'm not a big Dameon Harris believer, so some people might be screaming at the screen that they've got Dameon Harris. Devin Singletary is gone. We know that this offense is going to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league. If James Cook can carve out that lead back workload, we know that he's probably going to get the receiving work. Do you think that James Cook is a screaming value right now?
I think he's exactly the opposite. And you say maybe there should be some Dameon Harris believers who scream. I can scream at your screen for you. I believe in Dameon Harris. Dameon Harris was a top 5 graded rusher by PFF 2 seasons ago when he had his double-digit touchdown season. He has shown us he can be a high-quality rusher. James Cook has never, I'm talking 4 NCAA seasons plus 1 NFL season, 5 combined seasons, not in one single game has he ever had 15-plus carries. James Cook, not once. Not a single time in 5 combined seasons. This guy is not going to be a high-volume rusher, and he is an efficient rusher, absolutely. On 89 carries, you talk about Kenneth Walker. Again, he had some big plays as well. If he ended up forced into higher rushing volume, that efficiency would come down. We talk about the receiving work. I wasn't overly impressed with it as a rookie. I mean, as you said, last year, they didn't have any weapons last year, and they were not going out of their way to get James Cook involved as a receiver. He had 32 targets. That's 2 per game. He played 16 games and got 32 targets. Devin Singletary had 52. And Devin Singletary is Devin Singletary. So they were still preferring Devin Singletary as the receiving option at the backfield. James Cook, he feels like fool's gold to me. He feels like a consistent committee third down running back, and that's just what he'll always be. I don't see him ever transforming into anything beyond that.
Do you know what, David? I gave that big setup. I said, is he, a screaming buy right now? I completely agree with you. I think he's a mirage. I think he's the perfect trap running back, isn't he? In that, I think he will flash in spurts. Led the league in big time run percentage last year. There's going to be times where he can flash, but I don't think he is ever going to command the workload that will make him consistently fantasy productive. And he is the perfect type of running back that you're going to look at every single week and go, oh, do I start James Cook? Or do I go for this other player? And you're never 100% quite sure. And I can guarantee whatever week you choose to start him, he'll probably see 3 targets, 1 catch, and get 6 carries. And then the following week, you'll sit him on your bench, and he'll probably get 3 targets, take 2 for 8 yards and a touchdown, and score a touchdown rushing. He's going to be an absolutely hugely frustrating player to own. And I just don't think there's ever going to be a world where he is going to get the consistent volume he needs to be productive. And therefore, I think that whilst he may be talented, whilst he may show flashes, I think he's always going to be overvalued. And I think he is always going to be the kind of player that leans towards that roster clogger territory because you don't feel comfortable putting him in your starting lineup. And if that's a player like that, I would happily sell for, a second plus, pivot to another player, use him as a throw-in trade to go and, buy up at a talented position. I just don't believe that he's going to be great. And I also think as much as this offense is going to be a good offense, Josh Allen's going to take some carries around the goal line. We know that. Okay. Dameon Harris is fantastic in and around the goal line. We know that. Josh Allen doesn't check the ball down that much. He is very much a 1-2 to rush or scramble kind of guy. He's not one of these pocket passes that's going to go 1-2 to 3 to check down. So there's going to be limited usage in the passing game because the volume of those checkdowns isn't going to be there. So, yeah, I'm concerned that James Cook is overvalued. He's not a player that I'm targeting. I think if you can get a good deal in terms of selling, I think it's a really interesting player because I don't think he's anything more than a complimentary back, should we say.
Yeah. And right now on Bulletproof, he's at the 9-11 in the past month startup ADP. Some other guys going in the 9th round ahead of him. Kendre Miller, Michael Mayer. You can talk about these veteran wide receiver producers, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen. He's within sniffing range of those guys.
If I can get Keenan Allen straight up for James Cook, that is an absolute smash. Yeah.
It's funny because with your accent, it almost sounded like you were just ripping off like the F-bomb in English. if I can get Keenan, I'm like, oh, what did he just say? Did he just...
No, if I can get Keenan Allen for James Cook, I would absolutely do that. That's a smash for me every
Darren
day.
Waller, like I think with these running backs, the strategy is the sustainable dynasty strategy is to try and turn them into a sustainable wide receiver asset that is probably going to produce for the next 2 to 3 years, even if you have to add a little bit. Like we talk about, Deontay Johnson is basically within a round of James Cook at the 808. Like if we can go up to 712 and add a 2 to James Cook and go get a Marquise Brown, like a Chris Godwin, get one of these guys who we know is going to help us in our lineup for a couple of years. I'm willing to add that too to go do it.
Yeah, I endorse every single thing you've just said there wholeheartedly. So the next rookie running back, we're talking about hype. I think that, another off-season hype train, Rachaad White. Feels like people are bigging him up an awful lot. Are you a Rachaad White believer, David?
I certainly was coming into his rookie season. The receiving profile was prolific. He was the only running back in his class other than Breece Hall to run, I think, faster than 4.50, jump 38 inches vertically and weigh 210 plus pounds. So he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's got the receiving profile. He was horrendously inefficient as a rusher, as a rookie, which is really where all of the concern comes from. Obviously, that was impacted by the offensive line play. Leonard Fournette was also horrendously inefficient. So it's not a completely fair judgment of him. When we look at just like his production, he's one of 11 running backs since 2010 to be drafted in the first 3 rounds and put up 50-plus receptions as a rookie, joining Saquon, Kamara, Najee, Kareem Hunt, Trent Richardson, McCaffrey, Gio, Miles Sanders, Java Best. Really good list. And then also Duke Johnson. Thing is, Rachaad White, he had the least amount of fantasy points in that group and the lowest yards per reception in that group. So we could have a Duke Johnson situation on our hands here where it's like, all right, he's a good receiving back. Is he ever going to hold down a lead rushing role in the NFL? I think that's a legitimate question right now. There's not a whole lot of competition. Sean Tucker is a complete wild card. He has a really good production profile coming out of Syracuse, but again, it was a smaller school. Who knows what the medical concerns was? He was an undrafted free agent. So there's a wide range of outcomes there. And then it's basically Keyshawn Vaughn, who is just garbaggio throughout his career. So we know he's not a threat. It's tough to value Rachaad White because the ceiling is there with the receiving upside. If he can somehow hold down enough rushing volume, that's just, I don't know if it's a great bet to make right now. I think on a contending team, trying to sell that age gap, go after Derrick Henry, a guy who's nearing 30, but hey, he's got like RB1 upside, like even in PPR, like he could score 23 points per game, Derrick Henry. So I would be looking to make that move on a contending team. Again, if I'm a rebuilding team, I'd much rather just try and pivot him into a Brandon Ayuk, a Hollywood Brown, like try and get one of those guys. And even if I have to add a little bit, like I think I traded, this was before the rookie draft season, I traded Rachaad White in 207 for Traylon Burks. So I'm just trying to get more like of a stable, high profile wide receiver asset as opposed to a running back where, I don't know, maybe he's just Duke Johnson.
Yeah. I think that Rachaad White's one of these players that if you look long enough and hard enough at the stats, you can convince yourself that there's a story that he's going to be great. Obviously the last 2 years in this offense with Tom Brady at quarterback, the volume of targets going to the running back position has been absolutely obscene. When he was on the field last year, 23% targets per route run rate, like that's crazy high. 0.8% touchdown rate, like he's due some touchdown regression. There's an awful lot of work that's left this backfield that he could potentially scoop up. It's like, yeah, everything's there for Rachaad White to be great. But then I'm like, do I really want to run him back on an offense that's going to be led by Baker Mayfield with a below average offensive line? And that's what it comes down to, is that if I'm having to pay up for a top 24 running back, which is absolutely where Rachaad White is currently going in pricing, do I want a guy that I've got serious question marks about his quarterback, his offensive line, and how much workload he's going to get? And it's like, yeah, I'd rather pivot, as you said, to go and get 1 year of a veteran that's probably a similar price, or go and pivot to another position. I guess what I'm saying is that for me at the running back position, I either want studs, I want veterans that are underpriced but can still produce, or I just want volume. And by volume, I mean I just want loads of running backs that are basically free. And I think that Rachaad White is the perfect player that, yeah, he could produce. But realistically, what is Rachaad White's ceiling on a bad offense with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as the two target leaders? I don't know if there's a world where even in his highest range of outcomes, he's a top 12 running back. And therefore, do I want to go and pay those prices to go and get a guy that I'm saying I don't think could be an RB1? No, I don't. I would absolutely opt out of the position at this value and go and pivot somewhere else. So, yeah, I think there's definitely some appeal there. As I said, I could talk myself into Rachaad White, but I just think at the price, at the cost you've got to pay, I'd definitely rather pivot elsewhere. I mean, are you a guy, David, that thinks as we're approaching this sophomore season for these running backs, we're talking about there's kind of projected kind of uptick in volume, projected uptick in fantasy production. Are you a guy that's using that projection to go and sell, or are you a believer in terms of that second year breakout and that second year potential for a lot of these running backs that we're talking about?
I think it ultimately depends on the talent level. Like if it's a projected increased workload for a player who I believe can be elite, absolutely. If it's just a guy, and that's what the case is, projected volume, I'm a little bit more towards selling. And I think that's probably what the case is for Rachaad White. Like he's the medium range of outcomes is that he's just a guy. And that's even though I would say he does have top 12 upside, I would disagree with you there just because of the receiving upside. And I would also question, like, I understand the bad offensive line would hurt as a rusher, but with Baker Mayfield, I almost feel like that could kind of result in more checkdowns. Like he's got to get the ball out quick.
But I think to counter that, I think that's not Baker Mayfield's game. I think that's definitely Tom Brady's game. But if you look at Baker Mayfield in terms of the target distributed by depth and stuff like that, he is traditionally a guy that hits that sort of intermediate to downfield areas of the field. I think last year he was under 20% of targets behind the line of scrimmage, whereas Tom Brady was up above 20%. And I just think that Baker Mayfield's trying to push the ball downfield more often, and therefore, and also he's potentially going to scramble a little bit more than Tom Brady. So I just think that there's going to be fewer check down opportunities than what the Bucs have been for the last 2 years, which has been check down machines with Tom Brady on center.
So what you're saying is the pressure is not going to make Baker Mayfield check down. It's just going to make Baker Mayfield suck and do bad play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that probably the last 2 years have shown that of Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's willing to check down. I think that if he had been, he'd probably have stuck around, whether it be, in Cleveland, in Los Angeles, or in Carolina. I think that there is a chip on his shoulder that he thinks he can take everything on and beat everything, and therefore it kind of comes back to bite him. And I think that actually just taking what the defense gives him and checking it down and letting players go and make plays for him more often would result in better plays. So yeah, I guess I'm sitting here saying I don't think Baker Mayfield's going to change. There could absolutely be a world where Baker Mayfield comes out and he's a completely different quarterback and maybe stops pushing the ball downfield. But I reckon we're going to see a high volume of contested catches for Mike Evans downfield this year.
That's a fair argument.
So the final running back we're going to talk about, you dropped him in at the beginning. You said that he was going free in rookie drafts last year. Are you a big believer in Dameon Pierce and what he could potentially be?
No. No, I'm not. I think Dameon Pierce is a sell. Dameon Pierce, I think, is valued more along the lines of his actual NFL rushing ability than what he actually is as a fantasy asset. And I think that's kind of where the confusion is coming up. And the fantasy analysts are like, sell Dameon Pierce. And then all of the fans are like, he's a really good runner. And we're like, we know he's a really good runner. But the problem is he was not drafted very high, so he doesn't have a lot of insulation. He doesn't really catch the ball. And then we talk about Devin Singletary. All right, he's just a guy, but just that guy kept James Cook, who's probably, most would argue, even Dameon Pierce fans would probably argue, that is a better receiving running back than Dameon Pierce. If Devin Singletary out-targeted James Cook 52-32, what's to make you think Dameon Pierce is going to now seize that role from Devin Singletary? Like, that's probably not going to happen. The quarterback upgrade is going to help the offense. Probably helps the touchdown upside a little bit. Maybe they can get some more plays. Like, Pierce was getting good volume. You can see on the screen there, 220 attempts in 13 games, 39 targets in 13 games. That's what 3 games is. What, like 50, about 50 pace over a full season. I don't know if he's going to hit 50 with Devin Singletary there. And even if Singletary gets hurt, how do we know they're not just going to use a Rex Burkhead or somebody else like they did last year? Just throw somebody else in there to be the third down guy. So I look at where he's priced right now on Bulletproof. He is sitting at 602, basically the start of the 6th round startup ADP. This is right ahead of Michael Pittman Jr., Traylon Burks. Like, these are guys who are – Burks was a first-round pick. Pittman was a second-round pick. These guys are wide receiver ones, in my opinion. They have some legitimate insulation, even if they suffer an injury. Dameon Pierce suffers a serious injury, that could be sayonara. You're never a starter again. Like, so I just look at these other wide receivers in this range. I mean, my goodness, I'm taking all of them over Dameon Pierce. Brandon Ayuk, Calvin Ridley's behind Pierce. You could probably get a plus. Calvin Ridley, even for 2-3 swap, future 3. George Pickens, even if you're not a Pickens fan, I still think there's value to go from Pierce to Pickens and maybe a 2-3 swap. Some other running backs, like DeAndre Swift, I would take over Pierce straight up. He's a much better prospect. He outscored him last year. Pierce was RB20 in point per game. This is just not a difference-making guy at all, and he doesn't have that receiving ceiling. Swift is a round and a half cheaper. Miles Sanders, like almost 2 rounds cheaper. He's at 709. You could get a +2 on top of that. Again, you mentioned a guy like Joe Mixon. I can imagine some worlds you can sell Pierce a 2 and some junk. I don't know. Maybe, like we said, Gabriel Davis. I don't know. So James Cook. Pierce and James Cook in a 2 for Joe Mixon in a 1. We're taking Mixon in the 1 and we're just running and just going to a party, and have some more Coronas. Like, I think you got to sell Dameon Pierce, or at least try to if you have him.
Yeah, I think it's wild, his valuation. I kind of agree with everything you've just said. I think for me, the biggest scare is he was running back 20 in points per game last year, okay? These are the players that had a larger opportunity share than Dameon Pierce last year. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, and Dalvin Cook. That is it. He had a larger opportunity share than Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Ramondre Stevenson, Devin Singletary. Like, there's all of these guys that he basically was 6th in terms of opportunity share in the league. He's not getting that larger opportunity share ever again for the rest of his career. Yet last year he was running back 20 in points per game. Now, I get the argument that this offense could take a step forward. Well, the only way this offense is taking a step forward is by adding more talented players to this offense who are going to take work away from Dameon Pierce. Last year, this offense was a complete tire fire. They've thrown some resources at it. You got the likes of Dalton Schultz, and they've brought in some veterans, and it's like, okay, we're now going to be competent on offense. Well, yeah, we might see the extra kind of touchdown for Dameon Pierce or a little bit of regression in that perspective, but there's going to be probably less work overall. There's going to be less volume. And if he can only finish as the running back 20 with all of that volume, with all of the work in the backfield, I'm really scared. And I think, talking through this, it's just reiterated that for me, the way I'm playing Dynasty is that I'm opting out of this kind of middle tier of running back because I think you're having to pay a significant cost. There's so much risk and the reward is very little. I think that with Dameon Pierce, you can basically say the same things that we've said for Kenneth Walker, for James Cook, for Rachaad White, in terms of you're having to pay a cost to acquire, yet there is significant risk that they could just disappear overnight. They're facing competition in their own backfield. There's no guarantee that there's going to be significant production. I would pivot off all of those to go and get a wide receiver in a similar tier. There's guys, you're talking Calvin Ridley. Like, man, if I can get Calvin Ridley straight up for Dameon Pierce, I'm dancing. I'm singing songs to the bank. Like that's incredible. I wasn't a big fan of Dameon Pierce coming out. I took a lot of flack because I said I wouldn't take him until the kind of back end of the third round of rookie drafts. And I don't like the prospect. I don't like the situation. And I think that the value is just absolutely outrageous. So I'm very happy to pivot off him. I'm very happy to let somebody else draft him. And I'm very happy to go and buy a wide receiver in this range, quite frankly. Is there anyone that we've not covered? I know there's a few guys, whether it be Brian Robinson or Isaiah Pacheco or a few of those other sophomore running backs that we're not going to cover today that you particularly like or think could break out, or perhaps another player that you're throwing on the scrap heap and saying they're trash. Let's go and sell them for what you can get.
Yeah, just more sells. Isaiah Pacheco. It's the same thing. It's like, why would I want Isaiah Pacheco? He could disappear overnight. He had 13 receptions as a rookie. He's not involved as a receiver. I think Jerick McKinnon is probably going to outscore him this year, to be honest. Like, I would rather just buy Jerick McKinnon for a 3 than to pay up for Isaiah Pacheco. When you look at the range he's going in, he's right in that James Cook range. Cook is at 9'11", Pacheco's at he's higher, 8'12". It's gross. He's 4 spots behind Deontay Johnson, who has 2-3 straight years of 140 plus targets. Like, for a guy who is just could be replaced. I mean, for all we know, Deneric Prince is going to come charging in for his job. There's zero insulation to an Isaiah Pacheco. Brian Robinson is a little bit cheaper, so it's a little bit more palatable to take a chance on him because all the wide receivers have dried up. You're past Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman. We're getting into the rookies like Rashee Rice. So Brian Robinson is a little bit more palatable. If I had Isaiah Pacheco, I would try and get worst case scenario, Brian Robinson in a 2-3 swap. I'd rather just pocket the capital and take, the same risk, but take it a little bit cheaper. But yeah, I don't really think, I don't see anyone else. Sophomores, Tyler Algier, he's a sell. People are still paying 3s for him. Like in rookie drafts, if you still have a rookie draft, I would take almost any 3 for Algier, and just re-roll. I don't see any path to value for him.
Makes a lot of sense. I think basically this entire sophomore running back class is overvalued. I'd argue Breece Hall's not, but I'd certainly argue pretty much every other one is overvalued and probably a good pivot to go and grab someone else. But thank you ever so much for coming on, David. It's been an absolute blast. Remind people watching, where can they find you? I know you're doing fantastic work over at Guru Fantasy World. There's the Patreon, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you can sign up for as little as £1 a month, $1 a month. It is an absolute bargain. Where can everybody find you? Where can they come and subscribe?
Well, I don't know the conversion rate of dollars to pounds, but yes, $1 is our lowest tier. Patreon is where all my exclusive content will be. I do a monthly newsletter in the off season, just highlighting risers, fallers. It's got a full list of recommended dynasty trades. It's going to be a weekly newsletter in season, so you get that every week. I'm also recapping tight ends, going over the usage report, ads, buy, sells. So you're going to get a tight end recap every week in season as well. Access to my top 250 rankings, which is going to be a Google sheet. Each player is going to have a buy, sell, hold tag on it, player note as well. You get access to my tight end anatomical checklist, which is basically just charting and color coding every single tight end in the Dynasty Landscape's profile and NFL production. So we're looking at their athletic scores, their college production scores. We're looking at their draft capital, their early declare status. We're looking at their NFL production, their points per game, their yards per route run, their target share. We're just basically looking at the full holistic profile. And then we're just charting it color-coded green to red, so you can see kind of who's got these nice green profiles and who's got these kind of red flags in their profiles. So you get access to that as well. And then we have a Discord tier as well. That's a little bit more than the $1 tier. It's $2.99 a month, which is still pretty cheap. We have other analysts in there as well. Akash, Nelly is our Devi expert. So we have a few different analysts in there as well. You can interact with all the other patrons. So we have Discord as well. And then we also have Dynasty Leagues. If you want to join a Dynasty League, you can join our Dynasty tier as well as there. You'll put into a 12-team league on Sleeper with me, another Dynasty analyst, and 9 other patrons. So we have that as well. And then, you can just follow me on Twitter, where I'll basically just be, shit posting and putting a bunch of stats, and just having fun on there at Guru Fantasy World, WRLD. Shout out Juice World. No correlation there, and just Twitter kind of forced me into that with the character limits. But yeah, Guru Fantasy WRLD on Twitter, and you can find me there.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I love the work you're doing. One of my favorite followers on Twitter. So if you're not following, go and tick that follow button. For as long as Twitter's around, who knows? It might disappear by tomorrow. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been a great show. We'll be back very soon talking some wide receivers. But yeah, take care. We'll speak to you soon.